We are recording this evening for SCM, Simsbury Community Media. Some of you may know it as SCTV. So I'm using the microphone, and I just want to reiterate the most important things that Amanda said, which is if you're a member of the Simsbury Land Trust, thank you. If you're not a member, I hope you join. There's a lot of great information on the table over there, and it's really important to protect our natural areas for our wildlife and for us and for everything in the future. And for anyone that knows me, all I'm ever talking about is our land and our water and our kids, and that's the most important things. I'm so honored to be here tonight to bring to the Simsbury Public Library on behalf of Simsbury Land Trust. I'm also the president of the Simsbury Grange. There's also information about upcoming Grange events on the table, our Film Fridays and Music Mondays. And every year we also give out the full schedule of Connecticut fairs. I have a sample here tonight, but we're going to be leaving those at spots around town for the 2026 fair season, which is America's 250th. The reason why we're here tonight is on behalf of Trinity College, I brought Lawrence Cotton and John DeGraff, two well-known filmmakers. Lawrence is also a public historian. They both live in the Pacific Northwest right now. Tomorrow at Trinity College, we're having a major day under the theme of America the Beautiful. We are showing a 2025 release of the new film called From Sea to Shining Sea, Catherine Lee Bates, and the story of America the Beautiful, the poem that became the song that actually was considered for our national anthem. And it's a phenomenal film. It will be showing for free tomorrow in Trinity College's historic theater called Cinestudio at 9:30 a.m. and 12:15 p.m. If you love this talk tonight and you'd like to see it again, it will be presented again by Lawrence Cotton at 2 p.m. at McCook Auditorium at Trinity College. And at 7 p.m., we're going to have a showing of the film Stuart Udall and the Politics of Beauty. Stuart Udall was a senator and Secretary of the Interior and was pivotal in many of the national parks that are beloved by Americans now, in a huge bipartisan effort in the 60s. I would love to share those with everybody, so please consider coming to the college and see our beautiful theater, if not tomorrow, then at some time in the future. I'd like to thank the Simsbury Land Trust. I'm excited to be an advisor. I joined the Land Trust just about a week after moving to Simsbury in 2023, I think, so it's time. And without further ado, I'm delighted to bring to Simsbury tonight Lawrence Cotton, who's a public historian and filmmaker. He served as a consulting producer on the film I just mentioned, Stuart Udall and the Politics of Beauty. He also originated and co-produced the nationally broadcast PBS film, Frederick Law Olmsted, Designing America. He's co-producer of the film I just mentioned, From Sea to Shining Sea, which I saw a kind of reprise of this at Tanglewood this summer. It was so inspiring. I mean, I just think as we approach our 250th, we need to reclaim our brains on the themes of democracy, nature, health, and beauty. And so Lawrence understands that very well. And so without further ado, thank you for being here tonight, Lawrence Cotton.
Thanks, Susan, and it's a real pleasure to be here in Simsbury, and what a lovely town. I also have the good fortune of staying next door at the lovely inn. So, and it's good to know that there's so many people who are with us this evening who are clearly interested in the name Olmsted. It's an honor to present here at this library, and thanks to Susan and Trinity College very much for bringing me to town, and thanks also to Amanda and everyone at the Simsbury Land Trust for co-sponsoring this evening's program. My plan, and I hope I have a few surprises for you. Some of you think you know Olmsted. I hope you might come away from this realizing you didn't quite fully know him, but you will. I will review Olmsted's life and career. Then we're going to explore the Olmsted legacy across North America. Olmsted Sr., who you see depicted here, of course, and that's the famous John Singer Sargent canvas that hangs prominently at Biltmore, but also the two sons in the Olmsted brothers firm. And I'm going to spend a little more, I'll actually paint a picture for you of Olmsted landscapes across the country, but then I'm going to drill down and spend more time on Olmsted landscapes in Connecticut and the Connecticut River Valley just north in Massachusetts, where I attended college. So allow me first to introduce this man. Here is a colorful, I think I have another image, let's see. And I apologize, yes, I apologize. I've been on the road for 4 weeks. And in the middle of that, my trusty MacBook completely stopped functioning. It has been out for repair. I just got it back blank. So So anyway, but thankfully, thanks to Sue and Amanda, and I've retrieved at least this PowerPoint, but I haven't had a chance to fully review it. There might be a couple of slides out of joint, but bear with me. So allow me to introduce Frederick Law Olmsted. Here is a colorful description of the man by his friend, George Templeton Strong, a well-known public figure and diarist of the day. He is an extraordinary fellow. Talent and energy the most rare. Absolute purity and disinterestedness. Prominent defects. A monomania for system and organization. He works like a dog all day, sits up nearly all night, doesn't go home to his family for 5 days together, works with steady, feverish intensity until 4 in the morning, sleeps on a sofa in his clothes, and breakfasts on strong coffee and pickles. Now, I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen. I did breakfast on strong coffee this morning, but I held off on the pickles. Here is Frederick himself reminiscing on his boyhood here in Hartford. I was very active, imaginative, inventive, impulsive, enterprising, trustful, and heedless, a troublesome and mischievous boy. I was nominally the pupil of a topographical engineer, but really for the most part given over to a decently restrained vagabond life, generally pursued under the guise of an angler, a fowler, or a dabbler on the shallowest shores of the deep seas of the natural sciences. Well, that mischievous boy turned vagabond certainly eventually made something of his life. I hope you come away from today's program with a more enhanced feel for this man and what made him tick. Central Park, Brooklyn's Prospect Park, Boston's Emerald Necklace, the White City of the Chicago World's Fair, the park systems of Buffalo. Here's Delaware Park in Buffalo, an entire park system. The Louisville Park system, that's Cherokee Park. Parks in Chicago. Here's Jackson Park, the Japanese garden inside Jackson Park in Chicago. Detroit, Belle Isle, Detroit. The Olmsted Linear Park in Druid Hills, neighborhood of Atlanta. The Biltmore Estate, which some of us talked about earlier, of course, in Asheville, North Carolina. In Washington, D.C., the U.S. Capitol grounds. The green suburb of Riverside, Illinois. Mount Royal Park in Montreal. And the Niagara Falls State Reservation, the first state park in the nation, the first campaign to protect scenic preservation, successful in the United States. Well, those are just a handful of the more celebrated, masterful landscapes designed by Frederick Law Olmsted Sr. But if you add in the park designs and landscapes carried out by his two sons and the Olmsted brothers firm, the imprint across the geography of North America is astounding. 700 public parks and 6,000 commissions across the U.S. and Canada, from east to west, north to south. Perhaps some of our audience read, I know we have a literate audience here in a public library like this. Perhaps some of you read the New York Review of Books. Well, there was an article now a few years ago titled America's Green Giant by scholar Martin Filler, including discussion of new volumes by and about Frederick Law Olmsted, including this one that you see here. After initially calling attention to the acclaim that has been received by the Highline Linear Park along Manhattan's west side, which I just walked the full length of a week ago, by the way, he says, the author of this critical piece in the New York Review of Books says, yet however much the High Line has enriched the post-millennial megalopolis, its social effects pale in comparison to the revolutionary vision of the public park as promulgated by its greatest American exponent, the 19th century polymath, Frederick Law Olmsted. Well, I expect some of you read this a few years ago in the pages of the New York Times, a moving essay by Michiko Kakutani, who is an avid bird watcher. The heading was, Finding Refuge in a Snowy Owl in Central Park. This is an extract of a much longer column of hers. Central Park has long provided a refuge from the anxieties and stresses of daily life, perhaps never more so than during the time of the coronavirus. New Yorkers who visited the park every day, as well as those who have long taken it for granted, felt a renewed love for this amazing rectangle of green in the heart of the big city. Its startlingly lush woodlands and rolling lawns, its meandering trails and wide open meadows, and of course, its astonishing wildlife, including owls. Here is the very snowy owl. Including owls, hawks, herons, and a dizzying array of other birds who for generations have used Central Park as a vital rest stop in their migratory travels, knowing what many humans only came to fully appreciate during the uncertainties of the pandemic, that the park is a beautiful and essential sanctuary. And if I were the copywriter for the Times on that occasion, I would have underlined and bolded the word essential sanctuary. It's not an extra amenity. It's an essential part of our infrastructure. Just to give you a sense of the path that brought me to the PBS film project, which, by the way, aired nationwide in 2014, but it's still out there. I'll tell you how you can find it at the end. When I was young, I would visit the house of my maternal grandparents very near Boston's Franklin Park. As an adult, I would regularly walk along Olmsted's, here's Franklin Park. And as an adult, I would regularly walk along Olmsted's Back Bay Fens and the Fenway to visit the Museum of Fine Arts and the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum and so forth. Here's the famous footbridge on the fens. I would jog around Jamaica Pond and botanize and stroll around the Olmsted-designed Hartford Arnold Arboretum. All of those parks are integrated into Boston's famed Emerald Necklace, a crescent of Olmsted-designed parks and parkways that wind around a major portion of the city. Of course, I would eventually visit Central Park, being raised in Boston. I also had family in New York. But when I came across Prospect Park in Brooklyn, the first time I entered through this arch, which has been restored, the Endale Arch, and looked down the expanse of the Long Meadow in Prospect Park, tears welled up in my eyes as I was overwhelmed by its sheer beauty and utter perfection, decades before I even had a glimmer that I might be producing a film on this gentleman and his legacy. Well, some of you might have seen that film. It is widely available. It's on pbs.org, it's on Amazon Prime, and it's on YouTube. It's an hour-long film. You can easily find it. I learned very shortly after moving to Portland, Oregon some 30 years ago that the entire park system was master planned by another Olmsted, the stepson, John Charles. So about 18 years ago now, after completion of a prior film and thinking about what would be next, I began to delve deep into the Olmsted biographies and the background literature, the archives, and so forth. I approached an old friend back in Massachusetts who co-founded Florentine Films with Ken Burns. He's now independent. His name is Larry Hott, Florence, Massachusetts, Florentine Films, not Florence, Italy. And I proposed a collaboration. It took quite a few years to bring it together, but it did, and it did air nationwide on PBS in 2014. But during the past many years since then, I've continued to dig into the archives, meet with scholars, practitioners, explore additional Olmsted landscapes, and revisit some of my favorite locations. So allow me to summarize some of the salient content of the film and add to it, and expand and share some of my gleanings with you all these many years. So, in brief, his life. Frederick Law Olmsted's life began in 1822. I think all of you know this, I hope so, as the first son of a successful merchant, John Olmsted of Hartford, Connecticut. As a youth, Olmsted roamed his native Connecticut landscape in his father's saddle on horseback through the New England countryside in virtually silent, contemplative trips on horseback, taking in landscapes just like you see depicted that you know all so well here. Young Frederick attended several boarding schools, but he had to abandon plans for college due to weak eyesight. He worked briefly at a New York City dry goods importing firm, but the young man was captured by the romance of life at sea. So in 1843, he set off for China as an apprentice seaman. Thus, Fred Olmsted had his year before the mast, if you will. As a seaman sailing to China and back, in fact, it was a rather harrowing experience. He barely made it back alive, thanks to scurvy and a few other challenges. But he did return. He attended lectures at Yale. His brother was enrolled at Yale. Frederick was not. He was auditing classes, if you will. But he attended lectures at Yale, including one on the subject of scientific agriculture. Though his younger brother did However, he did spend a great deal of time in the company of other Yaleys that you see depicted here. Here's a photo of Olmsted. There's his, your lower left. This is his younger brother up here, John Hull Olmsted. And this is a very famous, another Yaley at the time. It was Charles Loring Brace, best friend and a very committed New York-based social reformer who influenced Olmsted's ideas and his career path. In 1846, Olmsted began to explore career, in fact, as a scientific farmer, a field that was on the rise. He apprenticed at a model farm near Syracuse, New York. Then, with his father's financial assistance, he farms at Sachem's Head on the Connecticut shore. That also fails. That farming enterprise fails. But subsequently, the soil wasn't really adequate for commercial farming. Subsequently, he buys a larger property on Staten Island, Tosamook Farm. There it is. That's his sketch down below. And he makes some improvements there. And it's at that time that he starts working with, experimenting with drainage techniques. He does a lot of planting. He actually has a produce and fruit that he sells in the New York markets. And he does a lot of tree planting and a lot of early landscaping there. And by the way, in case you're wondering, that house is now on the State Historic Register. And this is what it looks like. It's undergoing their fundraising. I know it's looking pretty poor. They're fundraising to restore, actually it's had some improvements since this picture, but they're fundraising to restore the house, exterior and interior, to the best as possible, and the grounds, and in the future to open it up for public house tours, but not yet. It's a long ways from that. In 1850, Frederick travels to Europe and the British Isles in the company of his younger brother, John Hull, and his best friend, Charles Loring Brace. Also in 1850, Olmsted is hired by the New York Times to tour the South and file reports from the field. More about those chapters in his life shortly. In 1855, Olmsted becomes a partner in the firm that publishes the popular Putnam's Monthly magazine. That business fails in 1857. That same year, Olmsted's first book about the South, however, A Journey in the Seaboard Slave States, is published to some limited public positive reception. 1857 is a momentous year in Olmsted's life. He is appointed the first superintendent of Central Park, and it is after that that he and English-born architect Calvert Vaux collaborate on the famous winning design for the park called Greensward. And with that success, Olmsted is appointed architect-in-chief for Central Park. This is the picture we all conjure of him, looking very dapper with his cape and his hat. And in 1859, he marries Mary Cleveland Perkins Olmsted, his brother's widow, formally adopts her children, raising them as his own. In 1861, Olmsted is appointed General Secretary of the U.S. Sanitary Commission with the outbreak of the Civil War. That was a Civil War-era national medical relief effort securing aid and supplies for wounded soldiers. More about that in a few minutes. After resigning his appointment to the Sanitary Commission, Olmsted is appointed Commissioner of the Yosemite and Mariposa mining estates. Go figure. He's out managing John Fremont's gold mine in the Sierra Mountains. He's managing a gold mine? He moves his entire family to the Sierra Nevada. There they are. And he manages this gold mine in a roughneck mining town. I think I have a picture of it here in Mariposa, California. And while there, however, he's appointed to a California State Commission, plays a leadership role in writing the first report proposing the permanent protection of Yosemite Valley. More about that report a little later. In 1865, Olmsted is reappointed landscape architect for Central Park, and with Calvert Vaux, he begins work on Prospect Park in Brooklyn. And on Broadway in Manhattan, Olmsted and Vaux opened the first office of landscape architecture practice in the United States, thus launching a famous career. Over the course of his life, Olmsted experienced considerable family tragedy, early deaths of mother, brother, and 2 children. His own near death in a terrible carriage accident in Central Park that left him maimed for life and was plagued by a nearly lifelong struggle with dark depression. And then dealing with all of that and a host of other physical ailments towards the end of his career, fighting infirmities and utter exhaustion. He was still designing the landscape for the 1893 World Columbian Exposition in Chicago, also known as the White City, and the grounds of the Biltmore Estate, and supervising the creation of these, his final masterpieces. Then, After a few years of waning physical and mental health, he tragically lost his mind. Olmsted passed away in 1903 at the McLean Asylum on the outskirts of Boston, an institution the very grounds of which he designed. What a life, what a story. Now let's review certain aspects of that career. Perhaps we should say careers. His many-fold roles of scientific farmer, social reformer, capable administrator, writer, editor, and literary publisher, landscape designer, and park builder. Frederick Olmsted Sr. was first and foremost a social reformer. He identified himself as such more than any other role or title. And his career was central to the social reform movement of the U.S. during the second half of the 19th century. He was a philosopher of democracy. He read widely and deeply and wrote thoughtfully about this subject and manifested it in his philosophy of park design and in his actual park creations. This is what Olmsted had to say about Central Park. And this is the reopening of the sheep meadow coming out of COVID. When the sheep meadow was closed to any public admission during the entire time of COVID, they reopened it. Here's a picture at that time. This is what he wrote about Central Park. It is one great purpose of the park to supply to hundreds of thousands of tired workers who have no opportunity to spend their summers in the country inexpensively what a month or two in the White Mountains or the Adirondacks is at great cost to those in easier circumstances. Another comment. In Central Park, you will find all classes largely represented with a common purpose, each individual adding by his mere presence to the pleasure of all others, all helping to the greater happiness of each. You often see vast numbers of persons brought closely together, poor and rich, young and old. As one of our commentators in our film, historian Keith Morgan said, Olmsted intensely believed in democracy in the park as a site for enactment of democracy. In fact, one could argue that Central Park was Olmsted's response to what he witnessed in the South and in the Civil War, and that the great park would provide a counterpoint in the North as a welcoming, democratic space where anyone could gather, regardless of origin or background, and that the park itself would point a way to the future for the future of the nation post-Civil War. In fact, 2 new books have come out in recent years that very much underline. I'll get into that again shortly. Though he strayed away from describing himself as such, he was indeed an artist. As is stated by historian Sarah Cedar Miller, Central Park was arguably the most important piece of art in American art in the 19th century. In fact, she says it's the most important piece of American art, period. I would maybe just nuance that a little bit. I would say it's the most important piece of American art created during the 19th century. Clearly, it was the most monumental in scale, unquestionably. Author and Olmsted expert Elizabeth Barlow Rogers, founder of the Central Park Conservancy, had this to say about Central Park in our film. It is a triumph of 19th century engineering, a symphonic sequence of beautiful spaces. I'm going to repeat that. It is the best phrase that captures his art. A symphonic sequence of beautiful spaces. And there is a musical aspect to his art, by the way. This is how I like to capture it. Another way I like to capture it. What the Hudson River School painters were doing, and let me actually just first of all back up. Ken Burns and I were classmates. We attended Hampshire College 3 miles from here. I lived in a farmhouse 2 miles from here. Of course, that's the Oxbow in the Connecticut River, and you can still see it to this day if you go to the summit of Mount Holyoke. Very famous painting by Thomas Cole, who's considered, of course, the founder of the Hudson River School. So what the Hudson River School painters were doing with pigment and brush in 2 dimensions on canvas, Olmsted and Vaux, his early collaborator, were drawing, painting, and sculpting the landscapes of our great cities while working in not 2 dimensions, not 3 dimensions, but in 4 dimensions. What's the 4th dimension they were working with here, anyone? Well done. Thank you. Bingo. Thank you. In Olmsted's own words, I have all my life been considering distant effects and always sacrificing immediate success and applause to that of the future. In laying out Central Park, we determined to think of no results to be realized in less than 40 years. In fact, you don't have to read too much of his writings or see his parks to realize his vision was 100 and 200 years into the future. I don't have time to do a deep dive into landscape design history today. Let me simply say that as a landscape designer, Olmsted was influenced by those who came before him, practitioners of garden design, and also deep thinkers in the realm of art, such as John Ruskin. In particular, I would mention the great English landscape designers that preceded him, Capability Brown and Humphrey Repton. Also, we have to give a nod to Andrew Jackson Downing, who was so influential in mid-19th century America. And by the way, if he hadn't met a premature death and a terrible steamboat accident on the Hudson River, he would have been most likely appointed the architect-in-chief of Central Park. But his tragic death opened up an opportunity for Mr. Olmsted to enter the picture. I also want to offer a shorthand. Let's see if my slides cooperate with me. Olmsted incorporated aspects of the pastoral and the picturesque in all of his masterworks. You know, there's the sublime, there's the pastoral, there's the picturesque. These are the three elements that you will often hear about in landscape design. Well, what's the sublime? In Europe, it's the Alps and the Rhines at Schaffhausen in southern Germany near the Swiss border. In America, what's the sublime? The White Mountains, the Adirondacks, and of course, Niagara Falls. It's hard to create those in an urban park, right? Or recreate them. But you can recreate the pastoral and the picturesque. And I'm going to depict this for you rather than explaining it. Well, here's the sheep meadow. Open, sunlit, fringed by trees where people can gather in congregate. Within a quarter of a mile from the sheep meadow, leads to the ramble. Curvilinear paths in the deep woods, a water feature, a burbling brook nearby, and of course it is the birding hotspot in Central Park. I'm sure some of you know that. And you always have these transitions from pastoral to picturesque and often back again in his large parks, including Prospect Park and Central and some of the others. So it's just classic, and that's the best way to depict it, just depict it with pictures. As builder of Central Park, Olmsted successfully managed thousands of men in one of the largest construction projects to that point in time in America. And during the Civil War, as director of the U.S. Sanitary Commission, the forerunner to the Red Cross, he perfected his management skills while heading up a huge supply, medical relief, and field hospital operation that included managing a veritable armada of hospital ships from the Chesapeake to the Mississippi. Here is one of those USC hospital ships on the Mississippi. During this period, Olmsted reorganized the Army Medical Corps and coordinated contributions and volunteers from local aid societies. In fact, by the way, the Sanitary Commission was the largest national public health initiative up to that point in time in American history. And sanitary fairs, like this one, were held in the major cities of the North. This one was in Philadelphia. And one of the women leaders of the day was Catherine Prescott Wormley. And in fact, she was a nurse who worked side by side with Olmsted in the field, tending to the wounded at the battles of Antietam and Gettysburg. That's right, he was right there during both of those momentous battles during the Civil War. In fact, here is the USSC setup at Gettysburg. As to his early writings, let's talk about his writings. He published a travelogue and a reflective series of essays in a volume, Walks and Talks of an American Farmer in England. And it was at that point, particularly while exploring the English countryside, that Olmsted was working out what overarching landscape design concepts he thought best to apply to American soil. And by doing so, to enhance the public park experience for everyone, not just the wealthy elite, as it was up until that time in England and the US. Parks were not for the public. They were only for the wealthy elite early on. In fact, he was particularly inspired by England's very first park, Birkenhead Park, near today's Liverpool, across the water from Liverpool, designed by Joseph Paxton. And he borrowed liberally, he admitted he did, from the design elements of Birkenhead Park in his design for Greensward for Central Park. He admitted it. He liberally borrowed design elements from his favorite British park at this point in time. And, on another front, the literary republic, and I indicate him here as writer, editor, and publisher. Olmsted's three volumes about his journeys to the South and the Plains, through the slave states, through frontier Texas, and through Kansas, had a lasting impact. They're still in print. The later edited version, he edited it in a single volume, reissued as The Cotton Kingdom. This is the one about the South, is widely available. It's still in print. And here is Olmsted's map titled The Cotton Kingdom. And his career, his journalistic career, started when he was hired by the early iteration of the New York Daily Times. You know it by a different name now. As a roaming correspondent in what seemed to be a foreign land to Northerners, the antebellum South. And when the first book was published in England, it had a huge impact on the intelligentsia and helped sway British public opinion away from supporting the Confederacy. That's right. On the lead up to the Civil War, British public opinion was leaning towards supporting the Confederacy. It's pretty much documented that Olmsted's, the first version of this, the first version of this, when it actually was read by British intelligentsia, drifted down to the public, it helped sway British public opinion away from supporting the Confederacy towards supporting the Union side. By the way, it's considered only next to actual slave narratives as the most authoritative, detailed, and I have to tell you, incredibly graphic description of the life of an enslaved human being. And it's actually a detailed analysis of the differential between the economics of slave labor versus free labor in the North. It's quite a book. It's quite a momentous volume. At the time, it was very influential. In fact, so influential that none other than Charles Darwin noted that it was instrumental in his coming to terms with the concept of race as he was preparing The Origin of Species for publication. Do I have another? And it was highly influential on the young Malcolm X as he was in prison, hungrily reading and feeding his mind as he was maturing in his political thought. It was that influential back then. In addition to his stint as publisher and editor for Putnam's Monthly, Olmsted co-founded The Nation magazine. He co-founded it and edited it. It's the longest published magazine of liberal opinion in America, founded by Mr. Olmsted, co-founded and edited by Mr. Olmsted. 150 years. During his brief period, it's 150 years old. During this brief period in his career, Olmsted befriended and published some of the most prominent writers and intellects of the day. They were all members of the American Renaissance, literary Renaissance: Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Herman Melville, and Harriet Beecher Stowe from Hartford. He befriended them, he edited them, he published them. They were part of his circle, he was part of their circle. And you could add to that list many of the social reformers of the day and the Hudson River School painters, notably his distant cousin from Hartford, Frederick Edwin Church, also raised in Hartford, a distant cousin. That's not Church, obviously, but that's his totally famous canvas, huge canvas of Niagara Falls. Well, you get the point. From Putnam's Monthly, The Nation, through his social circle, his ties to the cultural leadership, his contact were veritable who's who's of the arts and letters in America during this time. In fact, I've taken to recently calling him one of the leading influencers of his day. Maybe one of these days I'll actually do a whole talk that's just focused on that, Mr. Influence. We did try to give some credit to Calvert Vaux in our film. There he is, Olmsted's partner, the man who brought Olmsted into the design of Central Park, who subsequently convinced Olmsted to return to the business of park building when Prospect Park was available was ready to be radically changed in Brooklyn. But poor Vaux, he seems to have fallen out of favor with history, if you will, but Olmsted's names remains very current. By the way, it's important to understand the origins of the public park movement in America. In the highly polluted cities of the 19th century, trees, shrubs, and lawns served, of course, famously as, quote unquote, the lungs of the city, creating refuges of fresh air. Park advocates argued that parks provided refined imitations of nature, claiming that exposure to them would improve people's character, regardless of their socioeconomic status. In fact, architect and landscape designer Andrew Jackson Downing wrote this in 1848. I really like this, Andrew Jackson Downing, thank you. Parks will be better preachers of temperance than temperance societies, better refiners of national manners than dancing schools, and better promoters of general good feeling than any lectures on the philosophy of happiness. Just leave it to the parks. They'll take care of it all. Sentiments like that reflected the influence of the Romantics on the New World's attitudes towards nature. So they were also, of course, influenced by the Romantic poets of the age, especially the British Romantic poets. So all of this was fomenting at the time. The landscapes of the English designers and the transcendentalists and the English Romantic poets, which of course preceded them, but this was all coalescing and influencing some of the brilliant minds of the day, including Mr. Olmsted here. So Olmsted and Vaux and Downing, by the way, they both traveled to Europe, and they brought their experiences of touring European gardens back to the U.S., further emphasizing the beneficial relationship between humans and nature and democratizing the public park experience. Before Central Park in New York, only the bucolic paths of Brooklyn's Greenwood Cemetery were the place for urban New Yorkers to recreate, and it wasn't the common person who was there. It was the New York's gentry in their Sunday best, in their carriages, going on carriage rides and perambulating around. The workers were intimidated by that. They didn't go to Greenwood Cemetery for their own recreation. So Olmsted was adamant that Central Park serve everyone, regardless of skin color, family origin, or economic status. And I should emphasize that parks were seen also as instruments for public health. Think about this. In the mid-19th century, New York and all cities were still dealing with terrible outbreaks of cholera and other diseases. In fact, Frederick and Mary Law Olmsted lost their first child due to an outbreak of cholera in New York City. Indeed, Central Park served as the lungs of the city. In their arguments supporting the design for Central Park, Olmsted and his collaborator Vaux wrote this in 1868. Bear with me, it's a little bit of a longer extract. There is no doubt that the more intense intellectual activity which prevails equally in the library, the workshop, and the counting room makes tranquilizing recreation more essential to continued health and strength. Civilized men are growing more and more subject to insidious enemies to their health and happiness, and against these the remedy cannot be found in medicine or in athletic recreations, but only in sunlight and such form of gentle exercise as are calculated to equalize the circulation and relieve the brain. Now, there's some antiquated language there, but you may not even entirely agree with their case for passive versus active recreation. Our ideas have changed since then. But as you can see, along with Henry David Thoreau, you could also add John Muir to the mix. In this, Olmsted and Vaux were early proponents of forest bathing. It's unquestionable. A concept that, of course, the modern version of which originated in Japan, but they were all proponents of the equivalent of forest bathing. They didn't use that term back then. But I wonder, folks, let's see, do I have this picture? I wonder what Olmsted would think. I wonder what Olmsted would think when he sees people wandering around the outdoors with a soundtrack continuously beaming in their ears in a nice natural setting, not urban streets. Or worse, not absorbing the natural world, but rather looking down with their eyes entranced by their shimmering screens. I think he would be aghast, to be honest. By the way, I can point the finger at myself. I've done this also, but I try to be kind of aware of that when I do it. Now, our film, the original PBS film, zooms in on stories of Central Park, Prospect Park, Buffalo, and Boston's Emerald Necklace. A few comments about those. Here's Prospect Park. They considered it their masterpiece. And almost every Olmsted scholar today considers it the perfect masterpiece, not Central Park. Why? Central Park's been compromised many times over and adulterated and changed and modified. In Prospect Park, they had a free hand. And it hasn't been as highly compromised over historic time either. And not only that, there was no political or financial interference, not the same kind of political or financial interference that they had in the building of Central Park. So they just felt that was the more perfect piece of art, if you will. And by the way, let's see, do I have a yeah, I do. Here's a before and after picture. Look at that. That's the Endale Arch that I showed you at the top. Look at that. It's been recently restored by New York City Parks down below. Isn't that extraordinary? Just beautiful. Go to the Grand Army Plaza. Actually, the whole Grand Army Plaza has just also been restored, and I haven't been there. The whole Army Plaza has just been restored in the last 2 years. Go to the Grand Army Plaza entrance, walk through Endale Arch to take in the expanse of the Long Meadow. It's just a stunning experience. The Back Bay Fens, 1887, Boston. These were sewers. They were public sewers for the city of Boston. And Olmsted tackled it. There's another image, and this is what it looks like now. It was the first wetland restoration project in the history of the United States, what Olmsted did with Back Bay Fens. There it is today. Let's see, I'm going to try to move ahead. I could talk about many of the delightful discoveries that I had in producing this film. One is the Buffalo Park system. It is just extraordinary. The whole idea is of a city within a park. There are 3 parks there. It's the first integrated park system in the United States. I think the first integrated park system in the world, public park, let me emphasize that, first integrated public park system in the United States. And here's Delaware Park and Front Park, Delaware on the left, Front Park on the right. And here are the parkways. Olmsted and Vaux invented parkways. They literally invented parkways right there in Buffalo. They did not exist before then. Real parkways. We're not talking narrow, 10 or 15 feet wide. They're the equivalent of a linear park that goes the entire length of the roadway with additional trails and big tree plantings and trails in the middle of the roads on either side. Historic Lincoln, Bidwell on the right. Here is the Richardson Olmsted complex in Buffalo. That was a insane asylum. That's the Buffalo Insane Asylum. And it's a collaboration between H.H. Richardson, the famous architect, and friend and neighbor from Brookline, where Olmsted lived out the latter part of his life. And Olmsted did the grounds. It's all been restored. It's now a hotel, a restaurant, conference center, and much more. They keep restoring various aspects of this huge complex. If you're ever in Buffalo, check out the Richardson Olmsted complex. It is stunning. So let's talk a little bit more about some guiding principles, Olmsted's guiding principles. After his experiences touring and writing about the conditions of the American South, Olmsted wrote this in the New York Times. Government should strive to, quote, exert an elevating experience upon all people and promote public parks and gardens, galleries of art and instruction in art, music, athletic sports, and healthful recreation, and other means of cultivating taste and lessening the excessive materialism, a purpose in which we as a people are cursedly absorbed. So there's one of his interesting. Scholars have noted, and I have to chime in here, it seems to me that this passage, Olmsted laid out not only the role for public financing of parks, but also for public support for libraries, the arts and humanities, all under attack at this time. He realized these were civic institutions. They're, again, essential civic institutions. They're not just fluffy amenities, and they are deserving of public support, and they are central to our quality of our life. And that was the argument that he made again and again. They were what we now call the third space. Have you ever heard that expression? They're the third space in which people can gather together democratically and just be human beings, and maybe learn a few things. In his off-cited 1880 paper he delivered to the American Social Science Association, Olmsted wrote about how he saw visitors to Central Park as, quote, coming together with a common purpose, not at all intellectual, competitive with none, disposing to jealousy and spiritual or intellectual pride toward none, each individual adding by his mere presence to the pleasure of all others, all helping to the greater happiness of each. And with regard to the history of Yosemite Park, a little more details in order. Though, truth to be told, it's worth reading Olmsted's entire 1865 report. It's actually a relatively slim and readable report, which he wrote to the state of California. There's considerable background in recent books about this, but Olmsted took a cue from the Hudson River School painter Thomas Cole, who wrote, quote, the country is endowed with features unknown to Europe. The most distinctive and perhaps most impressive characteristic of American scenery is its wildness. As a leading member of the Yosemite Commission, the Yosemite and Mariposa Tract was donated by the federal government to the state of California in 1864. Olmsted and his fellow commissioners were directed to provide advice to California about this. And Dennis Drabell, a scholar in a recent book, wrote this: the specific pursuit of happiness that Olmsted had in mind, let's see, do I have another picture of him? Well, let's go back here for a sec. The specific pursuit of happiness that Olmsted had in mind was the enjoyment of secluded fresh air retreats. And by borrowing that phrase from the Declaration of Independence, the pursuit of happiness, he was in effect taking the Declaration out for a walk in the wilds. He viewed parks and the recreation to which they lend themselves as de rigueur for a thoughtful and inclusive democracy. That was Dennis Drabell in a recent book about Olmsted and Yosemite. And the healing power of nature, again, I've already emphasized this, I'll just repeat, the healing power of nature. It was, and in the case of Yosemite, Olmsted set the model for minimal intrusion of infrastructure, that but a few roads and public amenities should impede the experience of magnificent scenery and pristine nature. Of course, we do have lots of infrastructure now in our national parks, especially a place like Yosemite, but he was insistent in his report that it be kept to a minimum so as not to impede the appreciation of the majestic scenery. Samuel Bowles, the publisher of the influential newspaper, the Springfield Republican, that's Springfield, Massachusetts, by the way. That was a very influential newspaper once upon a time. And he was a key Olmsted ally. He foresaw that the type of large nature park proposed by Olmsted in his Yosemite report would become a model for other such parks across America. In the meantime, of course, Yellowstone was created in 1872. It wasn't until 1906 that Teddy Roosevelt actually signed the law creating Yosemite National Park. Olmsted proposed that California protect it, and they didn't act on it. The state of California didn't act on it at the time. So it took some time. It took John Muir and others to really bring it to and artists and photographers to really bring it to the public's attention. But the National Park Service now calls Frederick Law Olmsted one of the founding fathers of our national parks and our entire national park system. And there's a somewhat similar story regarding Niagara Falls, which had become let's see. Yep. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm a couple of slides behind. I apologize. There's taking in the fresh air at Glacier Point. As I said, I'm a little out of practice with these slides. I apologize, but let's catch up. Look at that. That's what Niagara Falls looked like, folks. That's right. That was the American side of Niagara Falls. That's what it looked like. Yep. And Olmsted in 1869, Olmsted joined with international writers and artists and intellectuals to lead a campaign for the preservation of Niagara Falls, for cleaning up the industry and creating a beautiful natural scene for the public to enjoy. And he succeeded. It resulted in unparalleled, and this was the campaign, by the way, the Free Niagara movement, and it resulted in unparalleled legislation on the part of New York to create a new state reservation, the first state park in the nation. And Olmsted and Vaux joined together to design the park on the American side, which of course has had a lot of amenities and infrastructure added since that time, but it didn't initially. And their pride and joy was what you see here. That's Goat Island. And you too can go out there today. There's the Goat Island Bridge to see the rapids. He and Vaux felt it was equally important to appreciate the rapids above the falls, not just the majestic waterfalls themselves. And they provided access. The Goat Island Bridge, and then the bridge to the Three Sisters at Goat Island. I'm sorry. And then there you can surround yourself with the rapids and have the kind of experience that he and Vaux wanted to give to the visitor, and not just the waterfall experience. A little bit about, I'm going to try to truncate some of this. Here's the son, John Charles. He's the eldest of the two sons, the adopted son who followed in his father's footsteps, trained at Yale. There he is at Fairstead. Fairstead was it is now the Olmsted National Historic Park. It's in Brookline, Massachusetts. It was the home, the practice, in fact, the first real full-scale landscape architecture practice in the nation, where you had the practitioners, you had students, you had draftsmen, you had plants people. They were called plantsmen back then. I think almost all of them were men at this point in time in the firm's history. And so it was a large office, and their archives are still there to this day. Their drafting rooms are still there to this day. There are exhibits, there are films, there's a restored garden, and you can take a national park ranger-led tour. Unfortunately, not right now. We have a government shutdown, so don't go there this week. But here he is at Fairstead. That was the name of the place, Fairstead. And guess what? He worked on the first county-wide park system in the United States, in Essex County, New Jersey, including Branch Brook Park in downtown Newark, which, if you haven't ever been during cherry blossom season, it is stunning. We have at least one person who has seen it during cherry. It is stunning. It's a huge park in downtown Newark, and it's an entire county park system. It's the largest and most gorgeous of the county park system. Branch Brook Park in New Jersey, famous for its cherry blossoms. And he came to the Pacific Northwest, where I live. He was entranced by scenery like this, the tall trees. Those are Douglas fir leading down to Puget Sound. He was also, you can barely make it out with the lighting, but that's early 20th century photograph of downtown Seattle with Mount Rainier in the background. So he was entranced by vistas like this. Interestingly enough, he left Boston looking like this, and he moved to the Pacific Northwest. Look what happened. He became Sherlock Holmes. The funny thing is, I moved from Boston to Portland, and the same thing happened to me. I kind of adopted a very different look after living there for a few years. It just sort of happens. You can't help it. But part of it is the weather, of course, needless to say. And he actually, just like his father worked on the White City, the World Columbian Exposition to Chicago. So in 1905, he did this for the city of Portland, which put Portland on the national map, the Lewis and Clark Centennial in 1905. And he did the same thing in Seattle with the AYP Exposition of 1909. Now notice this. Let's see, I don't have a laser pointer on this particular. Notice this. This is the Rainier Vista. That's Mount Rainier. This is the Rainier Vista. It's a World's Fair. It was all temporary, except for one element. You go there today, and it becomes the centerpiece of the UW campus. There it is. This University of Washington. What a gorgeous campus. There it is. That's the Drumheller Fountain, Rainier Vista, and a much more accurate, distant Mount Rainier. That remains, and that's the holdover from the AYP exposition of 1909. And his park plan for Seattle, oh my goodness, unbelievable. His park, 35 parks, all connected by parkways. The most extensive park system of its kind in the Pacific Northwest, huge. The Olmsted Park system in Seattle, and mostly pristine. It's really quite extraordinary. I'm going to show you about just a few. Volunteer Park, I like vintage note cards sometimes. That's Volunteer Park, vintage. Here's Green Lake Park. Here is Washington Park Arboretum. And I'm going now to Portland, a mile from where I live. This is the classic Olmsted Park in Portland. It's called Laurelhurst Park. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's actually on the historic register. So he did the same thing. He master planned, this is the elder of the two sons, he master planned the entire park systems for Portland, Spokane, I'm not going to show you Spokane, and Seattle. Seattle with the most significant in terms of numbers of parks. But there's a couple of other sites in Portland I want to show you, namely this, the largest urban forest reserve in the United States with some old growth timber, a very small area of old growth, but 4,800 acres. Actually, I think it's now 5,200 acres. Largest urban forest reserve contained within a city of any city in the United States. He said, don't develop it, protect it, preserve it. And now you can recreate in it. Here's another image of it. That's downtown Portland in the far upper right. It overlooks the city to the northwest. And it's riddled with gorgeous trails like this one with a brand new footbridge. That's the Wildwood Trail in Forest Park. Come back and have that experience, folks. Now, this is the City Beautiful movement. I'm going to kind of rush through this, but the City Beautiful movement was also essential to public parks as they continue to develop in the late 19th and early 20th century, especially the younger son, Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., which he started his career by helping his dad here at this place, at the White City, as a young person, and also at Biltmore. He was studying at Harvard, and he even spent his summer working with his father at his father's final masterpieces. And Lake Park in Milwaukee, another classic Olmsted Park, senior, this is senior, and it's considered a classic City Beautiful park. You can sort of depict flourishes of that City Beautiful design element there in that staircase and so forth. And of course, building the City Beautiful, I'm just using this as an example, but Daniel Burnham, again, the White City, it all started with the White City, the World Columbian Exposition. This was the announcement of the City Beautiful movement in America, when all the architects of the day, and Frederick Law Olmsted, one landscape architect and his younger associates, he had a couple working on the project, came together to design the World Columbian Exposition as depicted in Eric Larson's popular book, The Devil in the White City, which some of you have read. And here's, of course, one classic black and white image of that amazing White City. None of it is there anymore, of course, except for the Museum of Science and Industry in Jackson Park and the park itself. Jackson Park is the principal park that still is a holdover from that time period, including the one structure, the Museum of Science and Industry. Here's the Macmillan Plan for Washington, D.C. Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. was appointed to carry out the Macmillan plan with a host of other architects of the day to improve upon Pierre L'Enfant's original design for the city and to make improvements, to make it basically a civic work of art. So following again in his father's footsteps, there's Rick, he's referred to as Rick, Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., Rick. Here's again, this is where he started his career, another image of the World's Columbian Exposition. And at Biltmore, this is the beginning of Junior's career, and he takes over from his father. Here's the gardens. By the way, at Biltmore, we talked about Biltmore. It's not just the famous gardens at Biltmore, an entire 125,000 acre estate. And Olmsted master planned the entire estate to every single plant that's there. They're all in the plant list. All the approach roads, all the descent roads, all of the gardens, all the shrubbery, all the flowering plants, all the trees, including, of course, keeping trees that were there, but adding many trees and making improvements, all master planned by the genius of Mr. Olmsted, not just the gardens themselves. Here again is Fairstead. I talked about it earlier, but here's a nice picture of Fairstead. Again, you can go there. It's the Frederick Law Olmsted National Historic Site. Here is Junior at Fairstead. And again, the Macmillan Plan, a little bit more, but there's hardly a part of our nation's capital that isn't Olmsted, by the way. The National Mall, Olmsted Brothers. Jefferson Memorial, Olmsted Brothers. The National Zoo, Olmsted, closed now, Olmsted Brothers. The Executive Mansion improvements, which were just adulterated by the current occupant, but improvements to the White House by the Olmsted Brothers, the garden. And Rock Creek Park and Parkway, the entire park and the parkway that goes through the park, all Olmsted Brothers. And by the way, there are many other national cathedra. I'm not going to show you all of them. There's so many more sites, pretty much the entire nation's capital and the U.S. Capitol grounds. Olmsted moved the front entrance to the back and literally created the Capitol steps. That's Olmsted. And I have to wonder, I always give pause, and I especially gave pause a few years ago when I realized the events that happened there in January 6th of a few years ago. I don't think that was Olmsted's notion of enacting democracy, what occurred on his Capitol steps a few years back. That wasn't his version of enacting democracy. Anyway, here is that another version of that famous report. Again, it's considered very significant by the National Park Service. This is the new version. You can pick up the new version. They celebrated it. And it's his son who wrote the legislation that created the National Park Service in 1916. The Organic Act of 1916 that launched the National Park Service as a service and created the rules and regulations which it would live by, all written by Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. for Congress. He wrote the legislation. So like father, like son, and the Olmsted brothers worked on all these national parks. The visitor centers, the approach roads, the trails, the landscaping, all these parks, Acadia National Park, Everglades National Park, Great Smoky Mountains, and Yosemite National Park. And I have to give you at least one beautiful picture. I didn't do that earlier. I like to leave it for later. Isn't that a gorgeous shot of Yosemite? So, and out west, a quick tour of the west. Anyone ever been to the Red Rock Park where Red Rock Amphitheater is? That's part of the Denver Mountain Park System, Olmsted Brothers. The entire Denver Mountain Park System, Olmsted Brothers. Mountain View Cemetery in Oakland, Frederick Law Olmsted Sr. And here's another images of it, overlooking, it's the Mount Auburn Cemetery, if you will, of the San Francisco Bay Area, where the historic cemetery where all the founding fathers and mothers, if you will, of California are interred in this cemetery. And Stanford University. It's considered his most perfect university plan. He did many plans. The Olmsted brothers, father and two sons and brothers, did many universities across all of America, including famously Stanford. Here's some images of the Stanford campus, and you see how cohesive it is as an architectural campus and in its landscaping, which actually they're making improvements and they're trying to bring it back to the Olmsted original there as we speak. And the Berkeley Hills. Later in the 20th century, Junior appeared, following in his father's footsteps, and the conservationists and the civic leaders said, hey, what can you do with the Berkshire Hills? We want to create a park system. Here's the first one, Tilden Regional Park. It's now the East Bay EBRPD, East Bay Regional Park District. 57 properties, unless I'm mistaken. Look at that extensive park system, all master planned. The original, now they've added, the portfolio has increased, but the original master plan was Olmsted Brothers for a regional park system for the East Bay of the Bay Area. And the entire California park system, master planned twice over by Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., who also said, hey, you have already the Redwood National Park existed, but he said, hey, you have additional redwoods that need to be protected in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Let's create some new state parks to do that. He did. Of course, they've been damaged in recent years by terrible fires. And you have a desert that needs to be protected. It's the largest desert park. It might even be the largest actual state park in the state of California. And here is the Anza Borrego Desert in bloom, all part of the Olmsted Master Plan. And Palos Verdes Estates, the most significant residential compound ever designed by the Olmsted brothers, the largest and most sophisticated, quite extraordinary. All Olmsted brothers and just amazing. And this is what it looks like today, Palos Verdes, California, with trails and parks and public access and beach access. And unfortunately, they're having some subsidence issues. That's been in the news. Californians know about this. So that's another whole geologic issue going on there that I guess they didn't quite foresee back then. But and Riverside, Illinois, and what followed, this was Senior. Riverside, Illinois, one of the earliest planned green garden suburbs in the United States on the outskirts of Chicago. Well, his son, Junior, did the same thing in Forest Hills Gardens in Queens, Roland Park in Baltimore, and Mountain Lake Estates Historic District in Lake Wales, Florida, like father, like son. And if you ever go to Central Florida, if you're in the Orlando area, have you been to Buck Tower Gardens? Oh my God, thank you. quite a while ago. Well, go back because they've done more and more work to restore it and even make it more beautiful. It is the Olmsted Botanical Gardens masterpiece in the South. It's in Lake Wales, Florida. It is stunning. That's Olmsted Jr. And now, boy, I'm gonna have to get big short shrift for this. I'm just gonna kind of flashcards for you. Connecticut, and we're gonna bring it to an end. I'm gonna end with Connecticut and a little bit of the Connecticut River Valley in Massachusetts, okay? Seaside Park. Where is Seaside Park, anyone? Thank you, Bridgeport. Yes, I just wanted to pop quiz. I want to make sure you know your park. Well, it says right there in that slide, doesn't it? Seaside Park in Bridgeport. Here's various pictures for you. By the way, that was P.T. Barnum. He was the big brain behind this. Well, the big mucky muck, and of course he had money and the big political voice. And so it was under his urging, he was a resident, and it was under his urging that Seaside Park came into existence, but they brought in the Olmsted brothers to actually landscape it. Here's more images of yet Seaside. This is a nice aerial of the entire park. And Beardsley Park, also in Bridgeport. Yep, Beardsley Zoo, that's right, is there. But the park itself is an Olmsted Park. I don't think the zoo is. Here it is in winter. I kind of like winter images every now and again. Here's Hubbard Park in Meriden, also an Olmsted Park, taking advantage of the unique topography there, which is, I guess, considered a mini gorge or whatever, but it's unique because of the landscape that you see on the lower right. Hubbard's one of the few I've not been to. I've somehow not made it to Hubbard. And Walnut Hill Park. Where is this one? That's right, New Britain. And it's a famous Olmsted Park, by the way. It's actually one of the more lauded Olmsted parks in the entire state of Connecticut. That's the steps up to the monument on the top. And here's other images, and they have the monument and the garden at the circle at the top. It's gorgeous. Many of you have been there, I take it. And here's the historic marker that captures Olmsted's work on it. The original design, it was Olmsted and Vaux, notice. They were still partnering at this point. And what's very cool, right at the foot of the park is the New Britain Museum of American Art with a stunning collection, including Hudson River School of Art canvases, which is how cool that it's kind of and you look out their window, up the hill, and you're sort of having a Hudson River School backwards mirror experience looking up the park and appreciating the Olmsted landscape. It's pretty cool. By the way, this is his Olmsted's aunt's house in Cheshire, and he walked there. He and his brother walked there from Hartford to visit with his aunt in Cheshire. It's still in the family. There's an Olmsted owner and resident still in the family. I've had the pleasure of going inside. And what about Bushnell Park? Well, there's a little bit of debate about Bushnell Park, by the way. And I could take more time. There's a little bit of debate now. Olmsted was consulted, but he wasn't the designer. He was consulted, but he wasn't the designer. So it's not considered legitimately an Olmsted Park. However, Yes. Thank you. He was doing Central Park at the time. He was too busy, so they had to bring in another landscape designer to do Bushnell. You're absolutely right. He was consulted early on. And it is considered by some, especially Hartford, how do you say residents of Hartford? Hartfordites? Really? Okay, Hartfordites considered it the first public park in America. But people also call Boston Common the first public park in America, and I'm also going to show you a park in Worcester that claims to be the first public park in America. But here's Bushnell Park in 1916, and here's the park today. It's still a gorgeous park, and you could say it has Olmstedian elements, arguably. And here's Keeney Park, which I think Susan has been rather involved with. There's Keeney Park. It is literally an Olmsted Park. I hope you all know this. It very much is. It's well documented. Here's the sheep meadow in the early 1900s. Here it is today. And of course, here's the Keeney Park 10-mile woods trail map, which I also know Susan's been very involved with, including her students at Trinity College. So there's ongoing restoration and more and more attention being brought to Keeney Park. And it is absolutely an Olmsted Park. It's pretty well documented. And the Connecticut Retreat for the Insane. Does anyone know what that's called now? Thank you, Institute for Living. Now, I could do someone needs to do a whole program on the Institute for Living because it's quite extraordinary. And Olmsted himself, senior, collaborated with, oh boy, what's the doctor? With Dr. John Simpkins Butler. Some of you will know his name. And they collaborated because the founder of the Retreat for the Insane, which became the Institute for Living, wanted to have a therapeutic landscape. So he basically consulted with Mr. Olmsted to design exactly that. And parts of it are still there today, to this day. Of course, now it's the Institute for Living. And here's here's Olmsted's original lithographic print showing his design for the grounds in 1861. Again, I kind of like these vintage pictures. I can't help myself, but there it is again today. It's pretty cool. There's a whole great story there, and Trinity College, of course. And I can't spend a whole lot of time on Trinity, but that is an Olmsted. The core of the campus is an Olmsted design campus, as Susan certainly knows, and as I'm going to be talking about there tomorrow. And here's the early campus, and here is Northam Tower in the, is it called the Quad? Do you call it the Quad? Yeah, it's the Quad. And it's a classic liberal arts college. Quad, as you know, you've seen other such colleges around America, but it is, in fact, an Olmsted design. So there's very much an Olmsted imprint in the heart, the historic core of the campus. Here's a lovely old tree. That might even be my picture. Sometimes I throw in my own pictures. More often than not, they're online. I like this picture of the campus, too, with the city skyline in the background. And here's Old North Cemetery, where Mr. Olmsted is buried. I think you all know that. The family gravesite is there. Other members of the family are interred there. I haven't been back since they made improvements. I haven't been back for several years. I know they've made improvements to his grave marker. I have to go back to see it. This is what it looked like as of a few years ago. But I think, I don't know, I expect the granite is the same, but I think they've cleaned this up and changed it, but I'm not sure. Has anyone been there in the last couple of years to see? Is it improved?
It is improved. We'll go see it tomorrow.
We'll go see it tomorrow. Okay, good. I'm looking forward to seeing it tomorrow. There it is. Okay, let's bring this to an end. I'm just going to flash by these. Here's Springfield, Longmeadow, Colony Hills. It was an Olmsted residential plan. Olmsted Brothers. Note I say Olmsted Brothers. Mass Mutual headquarters. Yes, believe it or not, the grounds. Stern Square. This is downtown Springfield. Merrick Park in Springfield. And Holyoke. Boy, Holyoke is a major Olmsted town if you look into it. There's many aspects of Olmsted in Holyoke. It's quite extraordinary. There's a Prospect Park, there's Pulaski Park, there's the Riverside Springdale Park, there's Jones Point Park, that's the Olmsted Brothers plan. And just up the hill, of course, in South Hadley, up the road, is the Mount Holyoke Seminary, an Olmsted campus. Here's the college, Mount Holyoke College. It's an entire campus plan. It's quite extensive. And I like winter pictures, including the lake. The lake was part of the Olmsted plan on the campus at Mount Holyoke College. Here's Skinner Green. Skinner Green is considered the heart of that quad, of that campus, and there's the Skinner Hall that's depicted. There's some student event going on. I kind of like having student events in these pictures too. And Amherst College, part of it, just a part of the Amherst College campus, not the entire campus, but they did make improvements, including this section of the campus. And the Town Common, that's right, the Amherst Town Common, Olmsted. And Sweetser Park, Olmsted. Also, and the Evergreens, owned by Emily Dickinson's brother, Olmsted. Austin Dickinson knew Mr. Olmsted. Olmsted was a visitor to the Dickinsons during their time there, Emily and Austin. They all knew one another. And a certain college that you've never heard of called the Massachusetts Agricultural College. There's the original plan, an Olmsted plan, but it was carried out by Manning, who split away, mentored with the Olmsted, split away then to be independent and quite a significant city planner and landscape architect in his own merit. So the actual University of Massachusetts, as we know it now, let's go back. Is a Manning. To the extent that any of the historic campus is still there, it can be attributed to Manning, really, not Olmsted. And I'm going to end with Worcester. I'm not going to cover I could go nuts if I did Rhode Island and Eastern Massachusetts, but here is Worcester, Elm Park in Worcester, Olmsted. And Elm Park was founded the exact same time that Bushnell Park was founded, and they both claim to be the first publicly financed park in the United States, and they were founded at exactly the same time. Go figure. So I'll let Worcester and Hartford duke it out one of these days. But this is Elm Park, and it really is a lovely park in downtown Worcester. Near downtown, not in the heart of downtown, but near downtown. Now I'm going to end just with a couple of quotes, and I'm going to bring it to a close. You're wondering, when the heck is this guy going to end? So I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. Here's what landscape architect Faye Harwell had to say upon reflecting on her childhood experience in Central Park. Sometimes we don't even know that we've been experiencing an Olmsted Park. If you think of those tiny little experiences multiplied over all those thousands of parks, this is really a huge, huge impact on human experience in America. Often people have no idea that it's an Olmsted design park that they're having a joyful experience in contemplating nature, having a moment of rest. And Finally, I'm going to let Daniel Burnham, the driving force for the World Columbian Exposition, close out the program. When the World's Fair was set to open in 1893 at a dinner with all the artists and architects gathered to laud Burnham, the impresario, for his achievements, Olmsted was absent at this dinner. But Burnham himself pivoted. He deflected that applause and said this about his collaborator. Quote, each of you knows the name and genius of him who stands first in the heart and confidence of American artists, the creator of your own parks. He it is who has been our best advisor and constant mentor, Frederick Law Olmsted, an artist. He paints with lakes and wooded slopes, with lawns and banks and forest-covered hills, with mountainsides and ocean views. He should stand where I do tonight, not for the deeds of later years alone, but for what his brain hath wrought and his pen has taught for half a century. Finally, in Olmsted's own words, got to close with the man himself, the beauty of the park should be in the beauty of the fields, the meadow, the prairie, of the green pastures and the still waters. What we want to gain is tranquility and rest to the mind. Is it doubtful that it does men, he would have added, and women if you were with us today? Is it doubtful that it does men good to come together in this way, in pure air and under the light of heaven? Frederick Law Olmsted. Well, seems to me that prescription rings as loud today in 2025 as it did in the late 19th century. Thank you, Frederick Law Olmsted and Sons. Thanks very much, everyone. I sometimes like to throw this one back because it's such a magnificent portrait, the John Singer Sargent portrait at Biltmore. And it's a huge painting for some of you who've seen it. I like this one too. This is from the Boston Globe, birds and butterflies and flowers and springing from his noggin. And here's a thank you. And books, by the way, I could throw a bunch of books at you. I mean, slides if you want to take notes or take pictures, anyone. My most recommended biography is this one. There are others. This is my most recommended biography, my favorite of several. But this is a more recent one, also very good. Justin Martin. This is the classic desktop book about Olmsted's landscapes and aesthetics. A new biography of Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. came out just a few years ago. And my favorite two new books just came out during the Olmsted Bicentennial, which was 2022. The Power of Scenery, Frederick Law Olmsted and the Origin of National Parks by Dennis Drabell. I quoted him. And this one, Olmsted, Yosemite, and Civil War, Abolition and the National Park Idea by these two authors, both of whom I know. Highly recommend those two. And if you want to know what Central Park was like before Central Park, this is a fantastically interesting book. And on and on and on. There's so much. You can Google our website, unfortunately, is not functioning now, but just Google the title of the film, Frederick Law Olmsted Designing America. You'll find it, YouTube, Amazon Prime, pbs.org. And that's me. Thanks very much, everyone. It's a pleasure. Are you exhausted yet?
Yes, that was an absolute tour de force. I know Lawrence is willing to answer questions. I want to ask him to just repeat the question on the microphone so we can pick it up in the recording. I also want to say that I brought my vest in honor of the bicentennial for Frederick Law Olmsted, which I was very inspired and honored to participate in. And Lawrence mentioned my students. We are traveling to Washington, D.C. on October 24th. My students did a project called Voices of Keeney Park and got the President's Award from the National Olmsted Network. So they were so phenomenal. Yes, so check it out. You could probably Google Voices of Keeney Park and Olmsted Network or my name or whatever, and you can find it. And it's just a beautiful honor to the landscape that was really Olmsted's childhood landscape in Hartford. So without further ado, I want to invite questions for Lawrence and just ask him to repeat the question in the microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And Susan hasn't actually received the award yet. You're going to be there, right?
Yes.
We're both going to be in DC in about a week's time so that she can be given the award, she and her students, which is very cool. Yep. Hi, yes. Which
Cedar Hill Cemetery.
is that in Hartford?
Cedar Hill Cemetery in Hartford.
It might be. If it is, I apologize because I don't have it on my list. Okay.
The same guy who did the Boston
Oh, yeah, it's Mount Auburn Cemetery predates Olmsted's Mount Auburn Cemetery. If it's the same designer, yes. Oh, not Calvert Vaux. We'll have to look it up. According to according to our local authority, it's the same cemetery designer who designed Mount Auburn Cemetery, which is not Olmsted. Okay. Oh.
And then there's right next to a park, which is
Oh.
supposed to be special.
Okay. Thank you. Does that park have a separate name?
That's part of the whole area that creates.
Okay, I see. Thank you for.
It's an Olmsted style. There are a number of places in Hartford that may not be fully Olmsted designed landscapes that are very heavily influenced by him and sort of have an Olmstedian kind of style. Trinity College wasn't fully designed by Olmsted, but definitely was influenced by him. So, Hartford being his birthplace, it definitely has an Olmstedian feel to a lot of places, even if they weren't fully designed.
But thank you. I'm gonna look into it because it sounds like that you are speaking from a place of knowledge, unless your tour guide there was misinformed. So we'll look into it. You're right. But here's an interesting one. I cannot. Probably at least once a month, no matter where I am in the country, but especially if I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, they'll say, of course, Golden Gate Park, that's Olmsted. Nope, not a bit, not one bit. It's an urban myth. And even people in San Francisco, unfortunately, are under that impression. So it does happen a lot. And it was out in the ether, if you will. His aesthetic ideas and presence and his philosophy was out there, and others were calling upon it when they followed in his footsteps, even if they didn't do so knowingly or with giving him any credit. So, and there's a longer story regarding Golden Gate, which I don't want to get into now, but thank you. Jacob Weidenman. Yes, thank you. Jacob Weidenman, but is the designer of record for that cemetery, but we'll also look into that separate park. Thank you. Yep. Yeah, hi, yeah.
When we went to Biltmore, it's about a 10-minute ride from the main road to the actual estate. And the road kind of curved through the woods, and we didn't think much of it. Then we went on a landscape tour, and they explained how this is before cars, and he would bring all of his wealthy friends to the estate. And the way that Olmsted designed it was that it took about an hour because you weren't in a car, you were on something pulled by a horse, like a little trolley, and it took all these turns that you couldn't see around the corner, and every corner had different foliage, different flowers, and he wanted his guests to calm down and get away from the thought of being in the city with the pace and just be calm and tranquil. And I looked at it altogether differently after we went on this tour.
But it's hard for me to condense that. For the sake of the recording. Thank you. Very good, very astute observation, by the way. It's about reveal. It's the slow pace he wanted, and it's the same thing with his curvilinear paths in places even like Central Park. It's a hide and seek. He wants you to have a moment of reverie in the quiet, and then you go around a corner and much more expansive pastoral scene will open up, and then you're in another area of shadow and quiet, and then another expansive scene opens up, and it's a slow reveal, in fact, of the mansion. He didn't want the guests to see the mansion until they were right upon the mansion. And that was at I think George Vanderbilt also very much appreciated that.
That was another thing that
Yep.
amazed me.
Yep.
In every other place we've been to, you go straight on the road,
Yep.
and you get to the end, and you have the big gate in front of the mansion, and the mansion's right there.
Right.
There's no mansion. The mansion's over here with like a mall, like a grassy area, and it's way down, and you have to look straight to the right. It's nothing straight ahead, which I thought was very unusual.
Yeah. And like other Gilded Age unlike many other Gilded Age mansions, it is prominently up on a hill, but it's not so prominently in view much of the time until you approach it and get at it at the right angle initially by horse and carriage, presumably, but then now you still have to park far away, right? And it's quite a walk to get to it. In fact, even the parking lot is hidden, and you have to special maneuvers just to get down to it to see the gardens and the house. Yeah, hi. Yeah.
Do you know anything about its connection with the Eno family and Governor Pinchot from Simsbury here?
Well, yes. Well, apparently this is Pinchot's birthplace, correct? Right. So, yes. Well, I don't know the family you're referring to, but here's the deal. Pinchot entered the American consciousness thanks to Olmsted. Olmsted convinced George Vanderbilt that he needed to create the first scientifically managed forest in America. And Olmsted, I know just the right person for you. Why don't you hire this young forester by the name of Gifford Pinchot? I think he can do it. And he did, and it worked. In fact, Pinchot became so successful, he immediately got recruited away to do bigger and better things. So he actually had to have Carl Schenk come in, a German forester, to actually run the forest for him and create the first forestry school in America, which we now call the Cradle of Forestry. But arguably, Olmsted played a major role in launching Pinchot's early career. But the Eno family, that I can't speak to.
Yeah, the Eno family is related to the Pinchot family. They both actually have ties to Trinity College, so that's interesting for me. Full disclosure, I primarily brought Lawrence Cotton and another filmmaker, John DeGraff, to Trinity College for events, but I wanted them to stay here in Simsbury at Gifford Pinchot's birthplace. So they're staying at the 1820 house where Gifford Pinchot was born. And I heard from Anita Mueller, who's well known in town, that Olmsted did some work on the landscaping at the 1820 house, which was then the Pinchot home. I couldn't find any record of that, but there is an Olmsted influence on 3 properties in town. If the Dodge property, Allen property, and Westminster School, if you look up the Olmsted archives, you can look at what influence he had in Simsbury and in all other areas in Connecticut and beyond.
In fact, by the way, there's a cultural landscape report which has the details of all the Olmsted properties. It's produced by the Connecticut ASLA, the Connecticut chapter of the ASLA, the American Society of Landscape Architects. They contracted with a friend of mine to produce a comprehensive report that documents all of the Olmsted works. I think I have to assume it includes these smaller private residential contracts or commissions here in Simsbury, but maybe not. It might be just focused on the larger public parks. I'd have to double check, but you can just go to the Connecticut ASLA website. It should be available on the website. Yeah.
Thank you. This is very fascinating about a couple generations of Olmsteds.
Yeah.
I'm curious, any family today
Right. Yeah.
that exists in doing some of the same work?
I often get that question. There is an Olmsted, a landscape architect with the Olmsted surname in New Hampshire, I'm quite sure, and there's one in Seattle, I believe. But the Olmsted firm dissolved in the 1970s, early 70s, and as such, they're in their own practice, and they don't necessarily identify themselves as carrying on that family tradition. So not really. But I guarantee you there are landscape architects out there who certainly see themselves as inheritors of that tradition. At the same time, I'm going to mention, to be honest, the Olmsted name was partly forgotten after Junior's heyday. I want to say the 70s and 80s, most landscape architects went as far away as they could aesthetically from the Olmsted. They just wanted, I won't say they rejected him, but they just wanted to do something so radically different. But now they're returning to them because they realized, after all, he had some pretty brilliant ideas. And let's just do a 21st version of an Olmsted instead of a 19th century version. So, yeah.
All the work he was doing, was he a wealthy person?
No. Also a good question. He was comfortable but not wealthy. That's what the biographers tell us. He was comfortable but never wealthy. He actually penny pinched a lot, and he didn't live larger than life. He and his family lived relatively comfortably the latter part of his life, but he never particularly wealthy. No. Yeah.
Did he tend to favor in terms of hardscapes and also plant materials?
Okay, that's a complicated subject.
Well, I guess
He did.
question is,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
how has whatever you planted held up over time?
Mostly pretty well, except for obviously certain trees like elms, among others. He did bring in a lot of non-native vegetation. He wasn't conscious really about that thought. But exactly, because that's exactly right. He was also adhering to clients' interests. But even in his big parks, he often brought in, like Central Park, Prospect Park, quite a lot of non-native vegetation. It was a mixture of native and non-native. However, his two sons both studied botany, which the father did not. He insisted that the two sons study botany. They did. And I know for a fact that John Charles Olmsted in the Pacific Northwest was much more acutely aware of local plants and local vegetation and what worked there and what did not. And he applied that more so in the Pacific Northwest than the father did, mostly back east where he first started. Yeah. Maybe just one more question. Well, maybe two more. Yeah, yeah,
I've heard, and I use this at home, and my wife
yeah.
always encourages. Is it true that he believed that you can overplant and beg for forgiveness later? That he would truck full, pack a location, remove
Yeah.
later?
Yes, I think that was certainly one of the techniques that he did apply, and he knew that time would tell. You know, he could observe, like he was working on Central Park for decades, so he could observe what works and what didn't work, and where can we make changes. He was always sculpting and resculpting, no question about it. By the way, I will make one other comment. You've just reminded me of it. He preferred a muted color palette. He did not like brilliant, showy flowers. In fact, it's a long story, but as Susan knows, I also work as a historical lecturer in the small ship cruise industry. So I've been to Butchart Gardens a lot over the years. Who's been to Butchart Gardens? And yeah, it's beautiful, but Olmsted would consider it gaudy. He would consider it, he would call it the Disneyland of a flower garden, and he would think it's completely way over the top, and frankly it is. So he preferred much more muted color palette and subtle plantings. Although places like the Biltmore Gardens, they're a little showy, obviously, but on the whole, much more subtle plantings, and that was his aesthetic. So I think there was one over here.
Yeah, no, I had the privilege of growing up in Riverside.
Ah,
And I was
lovely.
in the centennial of the founding of that building.
Lovely. Yeah,
But
yeah.
do you have an idea, like,
Yeah.
was all of this organic from him, or did he, where did he get his
Well, he's toured England by foot, by the way, but foot and horseback, and he went to many of the private estates and the one public garden of the day, Birkenhead, and he studied Capability Brown and Humphrey Repton and Joseph Paxton, their plans and their actual gardens, and he took some of those ideas. He drew from a whole lot of sources, also some of the aesthetic philosophy of John Ruskin and the City Beautiful movement came a little bit later, but he was unquestionably influenced by Ralph Waldo Emerson, in particular his book on nature. Unquestionably, he was influenced by the transcendentalist thought as well, and he drew from all those sources, and it was organic for him. He just absorbed and absorbed and absorbed, and this is what came out starting with Central Park, and then he went on from there. He was a real Renaissance man and self-taught. So it's really quite extraordinary. Yeah. Anyway, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming, and please pick up some of the materials on the way out. And I hope that, as Frederick Law Olmsted recommended, we can use nature to engage and yet relax the mind. And I hope you had that experience tonight. Thank you.
For over 40 years, SCM
has been the voice of our town,
bringing us together through local programming,
education,
and live broadcasts.
SEM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community,
ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings,
and celebrating milestones
like our high school graduations.
But today, SEM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions.
And it's no secret, people have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SEM receives less revenue,
even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
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 Your donation can make a difference.
It will ensure that SCM remains open,
continues to educate our youth,
and keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SCM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SCM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Simsbury's voice.
Together we can ensure that SCM continues to thrive
for generations to come.
Visit our website
or scan the QR code on your screen to make your donation.
Every contribution
counts.
Thank you for supporting Simsbury Community Media,
where your town,
your schools,
and your government come together.